In the vast and undulating plains of the Vale Sereno ranch, where the Sun Ponte painted the sky with shades of fire and gold, life pulsed in a pace dictated by the stations. It was a place of rustic beauty and hard work, where each animal had its purpose and each man knew the language of the earth. In the heart of this world, there was a majestic bull named Samson. He was a creature of imposing strength, with a black hair like the night and muscles that wavered with each step, a living testimony of the noble lineage of his race. Samson had already been the pride of the ranch, the undisputed king of his flock, a giant whose power was as vast as the pastures he traveled. His presence was a guarantee of safety and order, a pillar on which the stability of the head was supported. The other animals respected him, and the cowboys admired him, for he embodied the indomitable spirit of the countryside, a force of nature in its purest and most primal form, a true sovereign in its green rule. However, this relentless thief charged its Samson price in a cruel and definitive way. A treacherous disease, which has arrived quietly like the fog of the morning, stole his vision. Darkness descended upon his eyes, turning his world from vibrant landscapes into a perpetual pitch. The once powerful king of pasture has become a shadow of himself, a giant lost in his own kingdom. He moved, hesitated. His steps, before firm, now gripped the floor with uncertainty. Confusion and fear became their constant companions. The world he knew for the smell, sound, and the touch of suddenly became a maze of invisible dangers. The other animals, once submissive to their authority, now avoided, some for pity, others for a cruel instinct that made them reject the weak. Samson was isolated, relegated to a lone surrounding, where his days passed in the darkness and memory of a world he could no longer see. It was in this period of deep melancholy and isolation that destination intervened unexpectedly. One night, a violent storm swept the serene valley, a fury of nature with howling winds and torrential rain. The storm, in its wrath, reaped the life of a noble mare, leaving behind two newborns, trembling and orphans. They were small and fragile, defenseless creatures thrown into a hostile world without the protection of their mother. The cowboys, led by the old and wise foreman, Mr. Ishmael, found the little ones at dawn, shrunken together against the cold, their bodies shaking with fear and hunger. The loss of mare was a hard blow, but the vision of the orphans weighed even more in their hearts. They knew that without a mother to feed them and protect them, the chances of survival of the little ones were minimal, almost null in that relentless and predatory environment. The search for a mare that could adopt the little ones was in vain. None of the other females of the ranch accepted them, each focused on their own offspring. Despair began to settle in the hearts of the men of the serene valley. It seemed that the fate of the foals was sealed, an inevitable tragedy written by nature. It was then that Mr. Ishmael, a man whose wisdom was as deep as the roots of the old trees of the ranch, had an idea bordering on madness. His eyes turned to the beautiful surrounding where Samson, the blind bull, spent his days. No one would ever consider placing two fragile foals in the company of a bull, let alone one that lived in the darkness and whose temperament was unknown. It was a huge risk, a bet against all odds, a decision that could lead to an even faster and terrible end to small orphans. With a tight heart, but moved by a last spark of hope, Mr. Ishmael made his decision. The foals, which he named Lightning and Thunder, were carefully taken to the surrounding Samson. The other cowboys observed at a distance, their faces a mixture of skepticism and apprehension. The air became heavy with tension when the little ones approached the immovable giant. Samson, feeling the unknown presence, raised his huge head, his ears spinning to capture each sound. He snorted, a serious sound that echoed by silence, his tense posture revealing his distrust. The foals, on instinct, shrunk, waiting for a violent reaction. That was the moment of truth, the moment when the desperate bet of the foreman would be paid alive or death, a moment that would hold the breath of all who attended that unusual scene and carried with imminent danger. What happened next challenged all the logic and expectation. Thunder, the boldest of the two brothers, took a wavering step ahead. He let out a small religious, a sharp, trembling sound that was more a rescue request than a greeting. The sound seemed to cross the barrier of darkness and isolation of Samson. The great bull slowly lowered his head, his body relaxing. He stretched his neck, his muzzle looking for the dark. Lightning, encouraged by his brother, joined him. The two foals nestled against the massive body of the bull, seeking heat and protection. Samson remained motionless, allowing contact. A collective sigh of relief and amazement traveled the cowboys. There, before his eyes, a miracle was unfolding, an impossible bond being forged between a blind giant and two fragile lives, a scene that no one would ever forget. From that day, an extraordinary routine was established. Samson, the bull who had lost his purpose, found a new one. He became the guardian, the protector, and the paternal figure for lightning and thunder. He guided them by the surroundings with kind touches of his muzzle, teaching them where to find the best grass and the freshest water. He protected them from the scorching sun with his immense shadow and warmed them during the cold nights with the heat of his body. The blind bull, who once lived in a world of silence and loneliness, now had the constant sound of small hooves and soft religions to fill his emptiness. He could not see them, but he felt, heard them, knew them in a way that transcended his vision. His blindness, which had been his greatest weakness, became the bridge to a deeper and deeper connection. For lightning and thunder, Samson was the world. They didn't know another mother or protector. That kind and blind giant was his rock, his safe haven. They learned to trust their other senses as well as their guardian. They communicated with him through sounds and touches, a unique language that only they three understood. They played around their massive legs, without fear, knowing that he would never hurt them. The vision of a blind bull leading two foals has become a common scene in the serene Valley Rancho, but never fail to marvel at those who witnessed it. It was a testimony of the power of affection and the ability of the heart to find light in the darkest places. The unlikely family prospered, a symbol of hope and resilience that inspired everyone. The bond between them deepened over the months. Samson not only protected them, but seemed to teach them. He taught them to be brave in the face of the unknown, to trust his instincts, and to hear the world around him with the attention that vision often overshadows. He taught them on loyalty and the force that comes from the union. The foals grew strong and healthy under their care, their bodies developing, but their spirits being shaped by the silent wisdom of his adoptive father. Mr. Ishmael watched everything with a smile on his face and tears in his eyes, knowing that he had witnessed something truly special. That unexpected bond, forged in adversity and darkness, was proof that love does not know species, barriers, or limitations, and that the real families are those that the heart chooses, against all the probabilities and expectations of the world. While the miracle of Samson's unlikely family, lightning and thunder unfolded in a corner of the ranch, a dark and threatening shadow began to extend over the entire serene valley. The farm, which for generations had been a symbol of prosperity and abundance, faced the worst crisis in its history. A relentless drought, like a sneaky thief, had settled in the region, refusing to leave. The sun, once a source of life, had become an inclemented enemy, burning the earth with its merciless heat. The streams that previously serpented like silver veins by pastures were now mere beds of dust and stones. The lush green that covered the hills gave way to a yellowish and brittle brown, a scenario of desolation that mirrored the growing despair in the hearts of men and animals. The earth was cracked, thirsty, and the heavy air carried the smell of dust and dying dreams. The water crisis was the epicenter of the disaster. The sources of water, which were always the soul of the ranch, were drying one by one. The large reservoir, built by Mr. Ishmael's grandfather, was at its lowest level in decades, a muddy pool where there was once a deep and clear lake. The wells, dug with so much effort, provided only one wire of water, insufficient to satisfy the thirst for hundreds of animals. The grass, deprived of vital moisture, withering and died, leaving the cattle thin and weak. The herd, once robust and healthy, now wandered through arid pastures in search of any tuft of vegetation, their bones becoming increasingly protruding under the skin. The constant sound of the bass and suffering of cattle was a melancholy soundtrack for the daily struggle for survival in the serene valley. Hunger and thirst were now the lords of those lands. Mr. Ishmael, with his shoulders bowed by the weight of responsibility, felt the future of the farm dripping through his fingers as dry sand. He was a man of the earth, a leader who had always found solutions to the challenges that nature imposed. But this time, he felt powerless. Debts accumulated as storm clouds on the horizon, creditors becoming more impatient with each passing day without rain. He had to make painful decisions, selling part of the herd at out of charges just to get some money to buy feed. And water, a palliative measure that only postponed the inevitable. Each animal sold was like ripping a piece of his own history, a confession of failure that haunted him during the feature films and insomnias. The ranch, his family's legacy, was on the edge of the collapse, and he feared being the last of his lineage stepping on that land. The crisis did not only affect cattle. The horses, pride and the main source of income of the serene valley, also suffered. Known for their strength, speed, and noble lineage, they were coveted by creators from all over the region. The sale of well-trained foals always ensured the farm's financial stability. However, with the scarcity of resources, the creation of elite horses has become an unsustainable luxury. The mares were too weak to conceive, and the few potros that were born were small and without the characteristic vigor of the serene valley lineage. Buyers, once eager to acquire their animals, now hesitated, their critical looks noticing the lack of vitality in the horses. The reputation of the ranch, built over decades of excellence, was undoing, and with it, the main hope of financial salvation. The crisis threatened not only the present, but also the future name of the ranch. The cowboys, loyal men who dedicated their lives to the ranch, shared the anguish of Mr. Ishmael. Their faces, previously marked by the sun and the joy of work, now showed a dark expression of concern. They worked tirelessly from dawn at dusk, trying to mitigate the effects of the drought, but it was a lost battle. They saw the suffering of animals and felt the earth dying under their feet. The morale was low, and the ghost of unemployment haunted his conversations. If the farm failed, they would not only lose their jobs, but their homes, their way of life, the only reality they knew. The serene valley was more than a place of work. It was a community, an extensive family, and the perspective of its dissolution was a terrifying thought for all of them. The despair was palpable, a dense mist that choked hope. In the midst of this bleak scenario, the story of Samson and Potros was a small but significant point of light. It was a reminder that even in the darker circumstances, life found a way to surprise and inspire. However, this little story of hope seemed insignificant in the face of the magnitude of the crisis that threatened to swallow everything. Lightning and thunder, now young horses, grew strong and agile under the care of the blind bull, oblivious to the economic storm that was formed around them. They were a living paradox, two of the healthiest and promising ranch animals created by an unlikely figure, at a time when everything seemed to ruin. His existence was a mystery that intrigued Mr. Ishmael, an anomaly he could not explain, but gave him a thread of hope that he clung to. The situation reached a critical point when a broker, a cold-eyed businessman and a calculating smile, visited the ranch. He did not come to buy horses, but to evaluate the earth. He saw the slim cattle, dry pastures, and despair in Mr. Ishmael's eyes. He made an offer for the farm, an almost insulting offer that exploited the vulnerability of the old foreman. It was an catch-or-drop offer, which represented the end of a legacy and the beginning of a soulless real estate venture. The broker gave Mr. Ishmael a deadline, a countdown to the end of the serene valley as he knew him. The pressure was immense, and time, like the water, was running out quickly, pushing the old to a decision he never wanted to have. Mr. Ishmael looked at his lands, to the faces of his men, to the animals that depended on him. He thought of his ancestors, who had poured sweat and blood to build that place. The idea of surrendering, of selling his family's soul for a trifle, was unbearable. However, the reality was hard and relentless. The debts were real, the drought was real, the hunger was real. He felt trapped in a dead-end trap. The future of the ranch, which once looked like a wide and promising horizon, is now going to be a single impossible choice: to accept the humiliating defeat or fight a battle that seemed to be lost. The shadow of the crisis had never been so dark, and the night over the serene valley seemed that it would never end. It was at the height of this desperation that Mr. Ishmael found himself observing the surroundings of Samson. He saw lightning and thunder, now almost adults, running with energy and grace that challenged desolation around. They moved in perfect sync, not just with each other, but with the blind bull who watched them with a careful stillness. There was something in them, a special quality, a harmony that he never saw in other horses. And then he noticed something else. He noticed as Samson, despite his blindness, seemed to anticipate every movement of the horses, how he guided them with subtle sounds and head movements. There was communication there, an intelligence that went beyond instinct. And it was at that moment, observing that extraordinary scene, that an odd and almost insane idea began to form in his mind, an idea that could be the last and only hope to save the serene valley from complete ruin. Mr. Ishmael spent the following days obsessed with the interaction between Samson and the foals. He sat for hours near the surrounding, a silent observer, trying to decipher the secret language that united the unlikely trio. What he once saw as a simple act of protection and affection, now he was beginning to realize as something much more complex and deep. End of transcription. He noted that Samson's blindness, far from being just a limitation, had forced the bull to develop his other senses to an extraordinary level. Its hearing was incredibly keen. he could distinguish the individual steps from lightning and thunder, even when they galloping together. He could hear the rustle of dry grass under his hooves, the rhythm of his breaths, the smallest changes in his movements. It was as if he painted a picture of the world around him using a sound palette, creating a mental map of his environment with impressive accuracy that challenged logic. It was not just the hearing. Samson's sense of orientation was infallible. It never collided with the fences or the trough of water. He seemed to have an internal GPS, a spatial perception that worked regardless of vision. Mr. Ishmael tested him, changing the position of the drinking fountain at night. The next morning he observed, amazed, as Samson walked directly to the new place, perhaps guided by the soil vibrations or a subtle memory of change in the environment. It was then that the foreman understood. Samson was not just surviving in the darkness, he had dominated her. He had transformed his deficiency into an alternative form of perception, a way of seeing the world that was invisible to those who trusted only his eyes. This sharp perception was the foundation of his connection with the foals, the secret behind his extraordinary guardianship. The true revelation, however, came when Mr. Ishmael began to analyze Samson's influence on lightning and thunder behavior. The two young horses were not just healthy, they displayed unusual calm and confidence. They were not frightened by sudden noises or unexpected movements, something common in young horses. It seemed that by growing under the influence of a guardian who depended entirely on hearing and calm, they had also learned to filter the world in a different way. They learned not to react to what they saw, but to hear, feel, to analyze the environment before answering. Samson, with their quiet and constant presence, had taught their serenity. He had taught them to trust something deeper than the simple visual stimulus, an invaluable lesson for any horse, especially for those intended for high-level competitions. The foreman began to realize that Samson's ability went beyond mere sensory perception. There was a form of intentional communication happening. The bull wore a series of low guttural sounds, buffets, and even beating his hull on the floor to communicate with the horses. Each sound seemed to have a specific meaning. A gentle buffet called them close. A more serious sound warned them to a perceived danger, such as the approach of a coy riding at a distance. A rhythmic beating of the hull seemed to be a command to move in a certain direction. Lightning and thunder responded to these signs with precision that was almost scary. They were not just reacting instinctively, they were obeying commands. The blind bull was not just a foster father, he was a coach, a master who was shaping his pupils in a way that no human had ever achieved. The hypothesis that was formed in Mr. Ishmael's mind was so bold that he barely dared to verbalize her. What if Samson's ability could be used? What if this unique communication could be used to train lightning and thunder for something more than just surviving in the surrounding? The farm was famous for its apartment horses, a modality that requires fine-tune between horse and knight, agility, and almost telepathic ability to anticipate cattle movements. It was a complex dance of instinct and training. Mr. Ishmael wondered, what if a horse could be trained to respond not to a knight's visual commands, but to the sounds? What if a horse could learn to work in harmony with a partner, guided by a hearing language, just as lightning and thunder were guided by Samson? The idea was revolutionary, perhaps even impossible, but it was the only spark of hope in the darkness of the crisis. To test his theory, Mr. Ishmael decided to conduct an experiment. He let out a young and Ariske calf in the surroundings with the trio. The reaction was immediate and surprising. The disoriented calf began to run wildly. Instead of joining the chaos, lightning and thunder looked at Samson. The bull, with his head and alert ears, has emitted a series of low and low buffets. As if they had received a direct order, the two horses moved in perfect coordination. Lightning ran to the right, thunder to the left, surrounding the calf with impressive efficiency. They guided him, without aggression, to a corner of the surrounding, using his bodies to block any escape attempt. They did not need a knight on their backs, reins to guide them or spur to encourage them. They worked together, guided by their blind master's sound commands. Mr. Ishmael watched, with his jaw dropped, the scene unfolds. It was more than he could have imagined. The horses were not just controlling the calf. They were anticipating their movements. They seemed to know where the calf would run before he did it. It was as if Samson's keen perception, his ability to read the world through sound and vibration, was being transmitted to horses. They were acting as extensions of the Taurus senses, their agile bodies performing the strategy formulated in the mind of the blind giant. That was not just horses training. It was something new, a symbiosis between species, an equestrian art form that no one had ever witnessed. The secret of the bull was not just a hidden ability. It was the key to a new way of understanding and working with animals. At that moment, Mr. Ishmael's despair began to become feverish excitement. He finally had a plan, one last card to save the serene valley. He would not sell the farm. Instead, he would bet everything on his two miraculous horses and his blind master. He would enroll them in the most prestigious and difficult state apartment competition, an event that attracted the best creators and the richest buyers. It was a bet of everything or nothing. If they failed, humiliation would be as great as the financial loss. But if they were successful, if they could show the world what he had just witnessed, they would not only save the farm, but they would change it forever. The future of the Serene Valley was no longer in the hands of creditors or in the climate of the climate. The secret was there, in the surroundings, in the form of a blind bull and two horses that learned to hear the darkness. It was such an unbelievable story that no one would believe her without seeing with her own eyes. Mr. Ishmael knew that the way ahead would be difficult. He would have to improve this training method, find a way to integrate a knight in this unique communication, and prepare the horses for the pressure of a competition arena. It would be a monumental challenge, but for the first time in many months, the old foreman felt a wave of genuine hope. He looked at Samson, who now rested quietly as the foals were nestled beside him, and whispered to the wind, "Thank you, my old friend. You will save us all." The secret of the bull had been revealed, and with it the promise of a new dawn to the Serene Valley. With the decision made, Mr. Ishmael dived headlong into the most ambitious project of his life, transforming instinctive communication between Samson and the horses into a formal and replicable training technique for apartment competition. The first step was to completely understand Samson's language. He spent weeks cataloging every sound, every buffo, every howl beat, noting the corresponding reaction of lightning and thunder. He discovered a surprisingly rich and subtle vocabulary. There were sounds to go, stop, turn right, turn left, accelerate, and slow down. There were even different sounds to indicate the urgency or calm necessary for each maneuver. It was a complex and elegant system, organically developed in the darkness of the world of Samson, proof of the incredible ability to adapt nature. The foreman felt like a linguist deciphering an ancient and sacred dialect, the key to lost knowledge. The next challenge was to integrate a knight in this equation. The horses needed to get used to carrying a weight on their back, as they still heard and responded to Samson. Mr. Ishmael chose his younger and light cowboy, a boy named Leo, known for his patience and gentle hands. The first time Leo set up Lightning, the horse was tense and confused. His attention was divided between the weight on his back and his master's family sounds. It took patient and gradual work to adjust. Leo was instructed to be a passive passenger at the beginning, not to use the reins or legs, just to sit down and allow the horse to follow Samson's instructions. The bull, in turn, seemed to understand the new dynamic. His sound commands became clearer and more emphatic, as if he knew he needed to guide not only his foals, but also the human who was now part of his team. Training was a separate spectacle, a scene that challenged any equestrian convention. Mr. Ishmael positioned Samson in a small surrounded in the center of the training arena. From his post, the blind bull acted as a general at his command post. Leo, rolled in lightning or thunder, was waiting outside the arena with a small herd of calves. Under the command of Mr. Ishmael, the calves were loose in the arena. Immediately, Samson began his command symphony. He listened to the movement of cattle and, with his buffets and hull beats, guided the horse and knight in a precise dance to separate a specific calf from the flock. Leo learned to feel the horse's intentions, to move in harmony with him, to become an extension of the animal, which in turn was an extension of the Toya's senses. It was a triple flow of communication, a trusted waterfall that flowed from the bull to the horse and to the man. There were moments of frustration and doubt. Some of the other cowboys looked with skepticism, whispering that the old foreman had finally lost his judgment, brought into delirium by drought and despair. They saw a blind bull making noises and a horse running apparently at random. They could not understand the order in chaos, the precision in performance. But Mr. Ishmael and Leo persisted, his faith in the method strengthened with each short success. They learned that the key was absolute confidence. Leo had to trust his horse, and the horse had to trust Samson. Any hesitation of the knight broke the connection, confusing the horse and making the bull commands ineffective. It was a deep lesson on leadership and partnership, taught not by a human instructor, but by an animal that lived in darkness. Over time, the technique was improving. Lightning and thunder have become incredibly responsive and agile. They could perform closed curves, sudden stops, and explosive accelerations with a fluidity that conventionally trained horses rarely reached. This is because they were not reacting to a rein or a leg pressure. They were responding to a sound that anticipated the need for maneuver. Sound communication was faster than tactile communication. Samson could hear where the calf was going to move and command the horse to intercept it even before the movement began. It was as if the horses had the gift of premonition, a competitive advantage that seemed almost supernatural. The skepticism of other cowboys began to become amazement and admiration. The wisdom of the unlikely master went beyond the technical commands. Samson taught the horses, and the humans who observed, the value of calm under pressure. The apartment arena is an environment of high energy and stress. Many horses become anxious and make mistakes. But lightning and thunder, created by the serenity of Samson, kept a remarkable composure. The bull, from his central post, exuded a tranquility that seemed to spread through the arena. His commands were firm, but never in panic. He taught his pupils that efficiency comes from calm, and control comes from the absence of fear. This mental lesson was perhaps the most valuable element of his training, a gift that could not be taught through traditional methods of repetition and discipline. Preparation for the great competition has become the only mission of the rancho. All resources, however scarce, were directed to the success of Lightning, Thunder, and Leo. The other cowboys, now converted to believers, helped in every way they could, taking care of the health of animals, keeping the arena in perfect condition, and offering moral support. The farm, previously divided by despair, was now united by a common purpose, a fragile but powerful hope. The history of the blind bull coach of horses champions became an eternal legend, a secret they kept with pride and expectation. They knew they were about to introduce something that had never been seen before. On the eve of the trip to the competition, Mr. Ismael went to the surrounded of Samson. The two horses were next to his master, resting under the stars. The old foreman put his hand in the thick bull, feeling the strength and calm emanating from him. He didn't need words to communicate. At that moment, there was a deep understanding between man and the animal. They had both faced the darkness, Ishmael, the darkness of despair, Samson, the literal darkness, and both had found an unexpected light. Samson's wisdom, born of his loss, had become the seed of salvation. The training was complete. Now it was just to face the world and prove that the impossible was indeed possible. The day of the competition was approaching, and the Serene Valley team prepared for the fire test. They were not only taking 2 horses and a knight, they were carrying a new philosophy, a testimony of the hidden genius of nature. They would show the world that true mastery does not come from strength or dominion, but from listening, trust, and a connection that transcends barriers between species. The legacy of the Serene Valley would no longer be defined only by the lineage of its horses, but by the extraordinary history of how a blind bull, with the wisdom born in the darkness, taught everyone a new way of seeing the world, forever changing the fate of the farm. The arrival of the team from Vale Sereno at the competition center was received with a mixture of curiosity and derision. The news that a ranch on the verge of bankruptcy was inscribing 2 unknown horses, trained by an unorthodox method, had spread like fire in dry straw. The other competitors, owners of rich and established farms with their award-winning horses and expensive equipment, looked at Mr. Ismael, the young Leo, and his 2 horses with an air of superiority. The vision of an old blind bull being carefully installed in a special surrounding near the warm-up arena caused laughs and derogatory comments. They did not see a master, but a bizarre mascot, a sign of the desperation and eccentricity of the ranch in trouble. The atmosphere was of skepticism and hostility, and the Serene Valley team felt the weight of the world on their shoulders. Leo, despite his courage, felt a knot in his stomach. The bright lights of the arena, the noise of the crowd, the critical looks of judges and competitors, everything was overwhelming. He set up Lightning, feeling the tension in the animal's body, which also perceived the strange and hostile environment. For a moment, the doubt assaulted him. Is it possible that they were making a terrible mistake? Was it your technique, so effective in the peace of the ranch, capable of resisting the pressure of a real competition? He looked at Mr. Ishmael, who gave him an encouraging nod. Then his ears captured a comforting, familiar sound coming from Samson's surrounded. A low and long buffet, a sound of calm and security. Lightning also heard, and Leo felt the horse's muscles relax under him. It was as if his master's voice had cut all the noise, creating a bubble of tranquility around them. When Leo and Leo's name was announced, a curious silence fell on the crowd. Everyone wanted to see what the blind bull horse was able to do. Leo guided Lightning to the arena, his hearts beating in unison. The gate opened, and a herd of calves ran out. From his post, hidden from the sight of most of the public, but positioned to hear perfectly, Samson began his work. The first commands were soft, guiding lightning to position themselves calmly in front of the flock. The horse moved with elegance and confidence that began to silence skeptics. He was not agitated or anxious. He was focused, his ears spinning back, listening to the instructions that only he and his knight could understand. The dance was about to start, and the audience arrested her breath, feeling that something unique was about to happen. The goal was to separate a specific calf, marked with a number, from the rest of the herd and keep it isolated. As soon as the judge pointed to the calf, Samson's symphony began to apply. A sharp and fast buffet was the signal. Lightning exploded in motion, plunging into the flock with a speed and accuracy that made the crowd panting. He did not run after the calf. He intercepted him. Guided by the sounds of the bull, who heard every step and predicted every change of direction, Lightning mirrored the calf movements with astonishing perfection. He turned when the calf turned, stopped as he stopped. Leo was a fluid part of this movement, his body moving in perfect harmony with the horse, his hands barely touching the reins. He was a passenger on a journey guided by an invisible force, a privileged witness of the genius of Samson. The performance was impeccable. The calf, frustrated by an opponent who seemed to read his mind, tried everything to go back to the flock. But Lightning was a living wall, always a step ahead. The crowd, which had begun laughing, was now standing, applauding with a growing fervor. They had never seen anything like it. The judges, experienced men who thought they had seen everything, looked at each other with expressions of pure unbelief. They did not understand how it was possible. The horse seemed to be operating by telepathy. Lightning performance was not only technically perfect, it was artistic, a demonstration of intelligence and tune that transcended conventional training. When the time was over and the sound of the horn echoed, the arena exploded in a foot ovation. Leo, with tears running down his face, caressed his horse's neck, knowing that they had made the impossible. Later, it was Thunder's turn. If Lightning was speed and accuracy, Thunder was strength and strategic intelligence. Its performance was equally stunning, perhaps even more. He seemed to play with the calf, anticipating his attempts to escape with almost arrogant calm, guiding him with subtle body movements, all orchestrated by Samson's sound commands. By this time, the secret was no longer a secret. People began to understand, or at least suspect, the role of a blind bull. The television cameras turned to Samson surrounded, trying to capture the conductor behind the masterpiece. The bull, indifferent to all the commotion, continued his work, focused only on the sound of his pupils and cattle, lost in his world of hearing darkness. He was living proof that vision can be a distraction, and that true perception comes from a much deeper place. At the end of the day, the results were announced. Lightning and Thunder not only won the competition, they broke all existing records. Their scores were so high that the judges had to revise them several times, unable to believe what they saw. The Rancho Vale Sereno, the Lesh, the candidate for bankruptcy, had defeated the most powerful dynasties in the equestrian world. Mr. Ishmael, standing next to Leo, felt the weight of years of concern to disappear from his shoulders, replaced by a wave of pride and joy so intense that it almost knocked him down. He looked at the crowd, to the amazed faces of his rivals, to the reporters who were now accused to interview him, and knew that that moment would change everything. The proof of fire not only overcome, she had forged a new legend. The buyers who once mocking now surrounded Mr. Ishmael, his checks in hand. The offers they made for lightning and thunder were astronomical, values that could save the serene valley 10 times. But Mr. Ishmael, with a calm smile, refused them all. "They are not on sale," he said to everyone's astonishment. "They are the family of the serene valley. But if they want to learn our method, if they want to bring their horses to be trained by the true master, the doors of our ranch are open." At that moment, he was no longer selling horses. He was offering a legacy, a new philosophy. He realized that the true value was not in the animals themselves, but in knowledge, in the wisdom born of adversity and personified in a blind bull. That night, the Sereno Valley team returned home not only with a trophy, but with a future. They had arrived like a joke and were leaving as pioneers. They challenged the impossible and won. The fireproof revealed to the world the magic that had flourished in the darkness of a lone surrounding. The story of Samson, lightning, and thunder was no longer a secret kept under 7 keys, but an inspiration to all, a testimony of the power of trust, communication between species, and the idea that the greatest forces can come from the greatest weaknesses. The day that began with derision ended in triumph, and the sun that was on the horizon seemed to promise a brilliant new dawn for the ranch that refused to die. The victory in the competition was the catalyst of a radical transformation in the Sereno Valley. The farm, which had been on the edge of the abyss, was reborn from the ashes, not only saved, but redefined. Mr. Ishmael's proposal to open the ranch as a training center based on Samson methods was received with overwhelming enthusiasm. Breeders from all over the country, and even from abroad, wanted to understand the magic behind the horses they herd. They no longer came to buy an animal, but to absorb a philosophy. The Serene Valley is no longer just a ranch of creation and became an equestrian gym of vanguardia, an innovation center where the limits of communication between man and animals were constantly expanded. The debts were paid, not with the sale of land or animals, but with the tuition of the elite horses, who now queue to be students of the blind master. The farm prospered like never before. New stables were built, pastures were recovered with modern irrigation systems, and the cowboy community, once threatened with unemployment, grew. Leo became the chief instructor, translating Samson's language to the visiting knights, teaching them the art of listening, trusting, and becoming passive partners of their horses. He taught that reins and spurs were secondary communication tools, and that the true connection was built through patience and observation. The ranch became a place of pilgrimage to those who sought a deeper and harmonious relationship with their animals. The reputation of the Serene Valley has been restored, now associated not only with quality, but wisdom and innovation. The name of the ranch echoed in conversations about the future of equestrian training. Samson, the unlikely hero, became a living legend. He continued his work, now with a Rotary class, student class. He never knew of his fame or the revolution he had started. For him, life remained the same, a routine of darkness sounds in the company of his children, lightning and thunder, who never left his side. They remained the main examples of the method, performing demonstrations that continued to marvel visitors. The trio's view, the blind bull commanding and the 2 champion horses obeying with perfect grace, became the symbol of the new serene voucher. Samson, surrounded, but a place of isolation, became the pulsating heart of the farm, a sanctuary where the miracle of communication interspecies was practiced daily. He was the silent patriarch, the master whose disability turned out to be the greatest gift of all. Samson's legacy transcended horse training. He taught the ranch humans a deep lesson on the value of difference and the force that can be found in vulnerability. They learned to look at what seemed to be a weakness and to seek the hidden force. They became more patient, more observant, and more humble. Mr. Ishmael used to tell visitors that the most important lesson that Samson taught was not like training a horse, but how to hear what is not said, how to see what cannot be seen. This philosophy permeated the whole culture of the ranch, creating an environment of mutual respect, not just among people, but among people and animals. The farm has become a model not only of financial success, but of ethical and compassionate coexistence with nature. Over the years, the Samson method was studied by scientists and animal behavior experts, who confirmed what Mr. Ishmael had discovered by intuition. They documented the complexity of the bull's sound language and the remarkable ability of the horses to learn it. What began as a desperate bet of an old foreman became an academic field of study, contributing to a deeper understanding of intelligence and animal sense. Books were written, documentaries were filmed, and the history of the blind bull that created two potro champions inspired countless people around the world. Samson's legacy was being recorded not only in the history of the Serene Valley, but in the annals of science and popular culture. Lightning and Thunder, although never sold, became the founding stallions of a new lineage in the Serene Valley. His descendants inherited not only their strength and agility, but also a remarkable predisposition to learn sound language. It seemed that the education they received from Samson had left a mark in their own genetics, or at least in their learned behaviors, which were passed on to the following generations. The farm became famous for producing horses that were not only superior athletes, but incredibly intuitive and calm partners. The blood of lightning and thunder, shaped by the wisdom of a blind bull, has become the ranch's most precious good, ensuring its prosperity for many decades. Samson lived a long and peaceful life. When his time finally arrived, he died quietly in his sleep, surrounded by his two foster children, who remained beside him to the end. His death was regretted by the entire Serene Voucher community as the loss of a great patriarch. They buried him under the largest tree in the ranch, overlooking the pastures he never saw, but he knew so closely. In his tombstone, Mr. Ishmael had a simple inscription recorded: Samson, the bull that taught us to do with our hearts. It was an appropriate tribute to an animal whose darkness had brought so much light to the world. Your spirit, however, never left the ranch. Samson's legacy became the very identity of the Serene Valley. The farm was no longer just a place, but a story, a legend passed from generation to generation. The story of how an unlikely bond between a blind bull and two orphaned foals, forged in a time of crisis, not only saved a ruined farm, but turned it into a lighthouse of hope and innovation. The new era of the Serene Valley was built on the basis of the wisdom of an unlikely master, proving forever that the true champions are not always those who win the races, but those who, against all probabilities, teach us a new way of seeing the way ahead. The farm, now a world landmark, continued to prosper, always true to the principles taught by its founder Blind. Mr. Ishmael, already a very old man, used to sit on the porch, watching the horses training in the arena to the sound of commands that mimicked those of Samson. He smiled, knowing that the future of his home was safe. The crisis, the drought, the despair, all seemed like a distant memory, a nightmare from which they were awakened by a miracle. A miracle in the form of a bull who, in his darkness, found a way to guide everyone to the light, leaving a legacy of love, resilience, and wisdom that changed the ranch forever. What could an old blind bull teach two defenseless foals? On a farm on the edge of ruin, where hope seemed to have dried up as the dulling earth, an unlikely friendship flourished. No one could imagine that the fate of them was intertwined, and that the darkness in the eyes of an animal kept the key to salvation. This is not just a story about animals. It is a lesson on how the most extraordinary force can come from the deepest vulnerability, and how ties forged in adversity can rewrite the future in ways no one has ever dared to dream. Get ready to find out how a blind bull not only created two foals, but turned them into legends that would change a farm forever.